Tonight I'm going to talk about Buddy Holly's last tour, the Winter Dance Party, scheduled to go through America, the American Midwest in January and February of 1959. I became interested in this 7 or 8 years ago. I used to work for a theater and film production company, and my boss came to me with the idea to pitch a film about Buddy Holly's last tour, the one where he, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper died in a plane crash. I let him know that I was as interested in Buddy Holly as the next person, but said, I don't think there's much of a story there. I thought 3 people made a remarkably bad decision to go up in a 4-seat plane in the middle of a blizzard and suffered the consequence. My boss wasn't too bothered one way or the other and said, well, look into it. And now it's become a bit of an obsession for me. The plane went down on February 2nd, 1959, and it was no doubt a tragedy, but this is more of a story of the exploitation of musicians that went on then and still goes on today. My goal tonight is for you to hear the facts and perhaps come to the conclusion that you would have made the same decision to scramble for a seat on that fateful night. So here's the story. So, okay, fabulous 50s in America. What's not to love? Well, a lot. But here's a snapshot of America in the year leading up to the tour. Dwight Eisenhower was his second term as the U.S. president. The Little Rock Nine, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled for the integration of African American students into public schools. Riot and protests followed. The space race. NASA was founded to be a new federal agency that would conduct all non-military space activity in response to Sputnik 1 being launched into space in '57. And Massachusetts Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy was gearing up to be the Democratic golden boy, prepping for the 1960 presidential election. On a slightly lighter side, Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army and enrolled to honor his patriotic duty. The Academy Award for Best Picture went to the epic war film Bridge Over the River Kwai. And baseball god Ted Williams was knocking it out of the park for the Boston Red Sox, making the unheard salary of $100,000 a year. Objectively, rock and roll was king. Elvis made a cool mill in that same year, but Elvis was the only one. Other rock stars of the day were doing well, but not as well as Elvis. In the middle of the fabulous 50s, the country went into a huge recession in 1958. Automobile sales had dropped 31% since 1957, and Detroit was at 20% unemployment. So back to the tour, the guys. J.P. Richardson, a.k.a. the Big Bopper, 28 years old. His song Chantilly Lace had been on the charts for 22 weeks in 1958 and was the 3rd most played song on the radio that year. He was primarily an East Texan DJ, making the transition into rock star. He was out of Beaumont, Texas, on the border of Louisiana, on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. DJs were huge stars at the time, and though JP was a big, reserved, and shy guy, his alter ego was a brash, hilarious Big Bopper. I love this little aside about him. In 1957, it had become a thing to have DJ marathons, where they'd see how many hours they could broadcast consecutively without sleeping. The record was 121 hours, so just a smidge over 5 days straight. So JP gave it a shot, and his station set up a big glass front studio on Main Street in town that sometimes had as many as 2,000 people watching. There were doctors on hand. He was sometimes taking 10 cold showers a day during a brief break of newscasts. At the 88th hour, his wife was helping him with the oxygen tank. In the end, he did break the record at 122 hours and 8 minutes, where he was promptly rushed to the hospital 35 pounds later than when he started. Okay, Ritchie Valens from Los Angeles was the youngest person who'd been going on tour at 17 years old. He'd had 3 hit songs in 1958, La Bamba, Donna, and Come On, Let's Go. At this point, he didn't even have an album out and had never gone on any kind of major tour, so he was beyond thrilled to go out with Buddy Holly. His career would ultimately last only 8 months. And here's a photo of him with his love, Donna Ludwig, whom the hit was written about. He'd later be made fun of on the tour for not going off with groupies after shows. And all right, the man behind the glasses, Buddy Holly, a 22-year-old genius from Lubbock in western Texas, who'd taken the world by storm. Buddy Holly and the Crickets had 6 songs that charted in 1958, following their 3 in 1957. They toured the country, even opening for Elvis on a number of occasions. People were in awe of him. signing with a major label, the band head to New York for recording and some shows, but he fell in love with a young woman named Maria Elena, the receptionist at his record label, and proposed to her after 5 hours in the middle of their first date. He soon moved to New York to be a star and to marry Maria Elena. However, the band didn't want to move to New York with Buddy, so they had broken up. As well, he was fighting with his manager, Norman Petty, about his songwriting contract. Even though he legally got released from that contract, Petty was not giving Buddy a penny from any of the royalties that he made. So he found himself with a New York City mortgage, a baby on the way, flat broke. Tours Buddy had gone out on before were rather high class, with lots of bands and proper tour buses, with the Everly Brothers, who sang All I Have to Do Is Dream, Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, all together. The Winter Dance Parties tour was arranged by Irving Feld, the head of GAC, which is General Artists Corporation. It's a big outfit, but the company was regarded as a shoestring outfit headed by a pharmacist who sold records from his pharmacies and cared little about rock and roll. But he was up for doing a winter tour. So in January 1959, Buddy Holly headed to Minneapolis, Wisconsin, joined by the Big Bopper, Ritchie Valens, Dion and the Belmonts, who sang Teenager in Love, and Frankie Sardo. They'd done a second-rate tour with GAC through the Midwest before, but it was during the glorious summer. Seriously, it's about the most wonderful place in the world in July and August. There weren't buses for them at the time, but that was fine in the summer. Buddy drove his brand new powder blue Lincoln. He was accompanied by a DeSoto station wagon pulling a trailer with their gear. They drove happily from place to place, stopping to rent boats, water ski, fish. So we find ourselves here, Winter Dance Party 1959, 29 dates over 29 nights in America's Midwest. There was a cold snap in the Midwest with sometimes blizzard conditions that had already claimed 14 lives in January. Though they hadn't been treated particularly well that summer, they had no idea what they were in for. So excuse the immature cartography. Here are the locations of 12 places they played before the plane crash. To give you an idea of the size of this area, it's over 530,000 square miles, so around 4 times the size of England. Logic would have it that you'd plan a tour from town to closest town, but Feld, planning a last-minute tour and being very greedy, took whatever offers of dates he got from different venues, no matter the distance. So that's what the tour actually looked like. GAC planned the tour with no thought of geography or road conditions. Instead of a well-planned tour, where they might travel 100 miles a day, they often travel 300 plus miles overnight on 2-lane rundown roads. And GAC had also accepted the lowest bid from some shady bus companies. Most nights they were driving, seldom stayed at a hotel. But it started swell enough. So all the bands flew to Chicago and got on a bus to drive to Minneapolis, where the tour started. The bus was already giving them problems, but they figured they would be fixed soon enough. And as the tour started, as Wisconsin was experiencing the deadliest winter storm in decades. So excuse my affinity to my native Fahrenheit, but I've tried to pay due diligence to the conversion to centigrade. They arrived in 3 degrees below zero temperatures, which is around 19 below in Celsius. It snowed 13 inches the day before, and 4 people had already died while shoveling snow. But they were having fun, played a great show, did a little dancing at an after party, and had a good night's sleep in a hotel. January 24th. The next stop is Kenosha, Wisconsin. Again, off to a good tour. It was only 24 miles to Kenosha, so they arrived early and well-rested, playing to a sold-out crowd of 6,000. And a little aside, if anyone is a fan of country music, it's Waylon Jennings. He was unknown and knew Buddy from Texas. He came on the tour to play bass as one of the Crickets. So then, January 25, on the way to Mankato, Wisconsin, this is where it starts to get shaky. They boarded what was essentially a school bus, traveling 381 miles overnight. Unlike a tour bus, there was nowhere to sleep. Some folk tried to sleep on luggage racks, but it wasn't going to happen. But they arrived and played. They always played. Not like any of us wouldn't have hated the cold, But also keep in mind that Bopper and Buddy were from warm Texas and Ritchie was from Southern California, so weather like this was completely new. And all of them being cashless, Valens had to phone his mother to get her to send him a winter coat to a future tour stop. January 26, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The guys stayed at a hotel and then drove 167 miles to their next gig. Important to note that at this point, the Big Bopper was coming down with the flu. January 27th, Montevideo, Minnesota. Minnesota is the cold, did I go ahead of that? No, that's it, sorry. The coldest winter state in the United States. They did 240-mile drive that day, which at times hit the low of negative 26 Fahrenheit, so negative 32 Celsius. But they were rewarded with a hotel that night, and this is Dion and the Belmonts playing in this photo. Next stop, January 28th, St. Paul, Minnesota. Probably the best day of the tour, especially for Ritchie Valens. They got to sleep in and were given a new bus to take them in the 155 miles to St. Paul. The temperature even made it up to a balmy negative 2 Celsius. Firstly, though, Valens got his coat in the mail. Secondly, Variety reported that day that his song Donna had hit number 4 on the charts and La Bamba was holding steady at number 17. He was widely regarded by the bands as the best guitar player they'd ever heard, and Carl Bunch, the drummer for the Crickets, said, "I've never met anyone with a better command of an audience than Ritchie." Okay. January 29th, Davenport, Iowa. This is the only known photo of the three of them. Not being a world of iPhones and photographers and not wanting to brave the weather, or photographers not wanting to brave the weather, there were amazingly few photos of the tour. Maybe only dozens exist. Slight aside about the Bopper, that day was a sad day that a DJ named Peter Tripp from New York City's WMGM broke the Bopper's broadcast record with a 200-hour sleepless broadcast. We're talking over eight days until he was rushed to the hospital. Okay. The slight break in the Arctic weather was soon gone. Slight drizzle quickly turned to sleet. The heat started going on their bus again, so they drove 320 miles for a 2-show night. Even in concerts, it was hard to be warm. Many of the venues had already been turned into ice skating rinks and only had wooden planks over the ice. And Ritchie and a few others were now coming down with the flu as well. So January 30th, off to Fort Dodge in a 200-mile journey. 30 miles into the trip, the heat in the bus had completely stopped working, finding all 9 heaters to be frozen. At least they had 5 hours off their journey for them to hang out in an unexpected break in a town called Tipton. And here's where the writing was on the wall. After the packed show that night, Buddy sat down on the radio with a local DJ and MC of the show, Bill McCullough. Buddy talked about the dread of getting back on the bus, and the DJ, who was taking flying lessons, excitedly offered to fly our star to his next destination. Buddy had also been taking flying lessons and was thrilled. As fact would have it, McCullough didn't have a pilot's license that would allow him to fly so far, but said he'd find someone to take him. No company would take the charter, saying that flying that distance in that weather would be risky at best. January 31st, all aboard for Duluth, Michigan. It was below zero when they woke up, but that was nothing compared to the negative 31 Celsius they found in Duluth, with a forecast for negative 37 that night. The bands were exhausted. The bands were exhausted and starting to go a little mad. On the 360-mile freezing ride, Freddie Milano, one of the Belmonts, was playing around with an unloaded gun, putting it to people's heads and putting everyone on edge as he threatened to kill them. The bus driver stopped at some point and took the gun away. Arriving at the show, they were told the matinee was added for the next day, so they'd have to leave right after the gig without any sleep again. And people seem to like to know that a 16-year-old Bob Dylan was in the audience that night, so there you have that. Okay, February 1st, Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'll explain the circumstances why the next show never happened. Less than 100 miles from Duluth in the middle of the night, the bus died near Hurley, Wisconsin. There was absolutely no traffic passing, and they made the decision to stay with the bus, even though the temperature inside was roughly the same as the outside. They burned papers inside the bus to try to stay warm, and took their mind off things with stories and whiskey. They had piles of rank laundry to do, but had no time to do it with the crazy travel schedule and couldn't find people to dry clean the clothes. The stink made the bus almost unbearable. Finally, a truck went by, but they were unable to flag him down. The trucker did notify the sheriff's department, saying that a group of men without hats and gloves had been standing outside a stranded bus 15 miles outside of town. Life-threatening trouble. After 2 hours spent by the roadside, help showed. When the sheriff, Bob Eckhart, arrived, he stepped into the bus with flashlights, and he was greeted by a group of pale and sick young men, some huddled together under blankets. One person couldn't stand up. The one who couldn't stand, Cricket's drummer, Carl Bunch, was rushed to the hospital where he was admitted with frostbite. Sheriff Eckhart said, maybe the only thing that kept the group alive was the fact that they had no idea how close they were to dying. They couldn't fix the bus, so they canceled the Appleton concert but had an evening show in Green Bay. Everyone took either trains or a Greyhound to the next gig. Carl stayed in the hospital. Ritchie called his manager, who was aghast at the conditions, and immediately started the process of getting Valens off the tour and on a plane back to LA. February 2, Clear Lake, Iowa. They finally arrived at Clear Lake, and they played that night. Buddy Holly played drums for the Belmonts, and Ritchie Valens played drums for the Crickets. Another bus had been hired and was waiting for them. At this point, Buddy wasn't getting on any other bus. He talked to the manager of the Surf Ballroom, Carol Anderson, to try to find a charter. No one would take them up. But on the fourth try, they found a company that would arrange a plane for $36 a person. Everybody flew in the Clear Lake area, as it was so vast with so few roads at this time. Anderson even said he flew the 2.5 miles to school when he was 14. But he just wanted to deal with everyone's laundry and have one good rest. This is the last picture of Buddy Holly ever taken at the last concert. Roger Peterson, a 22-year-old pilot, agreed to fly 3 passengers to Fargo. Buddy offered the other 2 seats to his remaining bandmates. Waylon offered his seat to the Big Bopper because he had such a flu. Ritchie Valens' flu was getting worse, and he wanted to head back to LA as soon as possible and begged the Crickets' Tommy Alsop to at least flip a coin for the seat. After saying no repeatedly, Tommy finally said yes and lost the toss to Ritchie. The rest of the guys got on the bus, and after some teasing about the bus, Waylon Jennings' last words to Holly were, "Well, hell, I hope your old plane crashes." And he never got over that. At about 12:55 a.m., the Beechcraft Bonanza plane took off and crashed 7.5 miles from the airport, killing all on board. It was not until 9:30 the next morning that people started looking for the plane. The bands did not know of the crash until they checked into the hotel in Moorhead and were told by staff. Feld from GAC was already flying in replacements to finish the tour, and most of the families of the deceased found out through radio broadcasts. Maria Elena Holly had a miscarriage 2 days later. The cold snap ended that day, leading into weeks of weather above the freezing point. Everybody wanted to stop the tour. The remaining Crickets were promised the balance of what Buddy was owed from the tour if they finished, but they never saw any of the money. Jimmy Clanton, Frankie Avalon, and Fabian came to join for various portions of the tour. Ritchie Valens' first album was released the day before the tour ended. Not one person got paid for the tour. So, I don't know. What would you have done? Maybe tonight you'll go home and listen to American Pie a little differently. So to Ritchie Valens, J.P. Richardson, and Buddy Holly, rest in peace, and thank y'all.
Wow, what a story. Rachel, you okay to take some questions? Is that you can't get away that easily. I never knew. I've heard American Pie. I knew it was about the day the music died, but I didn't know that. Does anybody have any questions for Rachel about Buddy Holly, about that tour? I mean, I'm fascinated. Where did you get those photos from? Because they are quite stunning.
It was a long haul. Again, like I said, there's very few pictures, and people who are doing documentaries and writing books had a very hard time. So it's 7 years of looking, and then with like Elvis and stuff like that, I have an account with Getty Images, so stuff like that. But again, you do a search on Google for Ritchie Valens live, Buddy Holly live, any of that, Big Bopper live. You don't come up, especially Big Bopper, you come up with nothing, and very little, and very little about those guys. Again, Ritchie Valens was not even 8 months into his career, so.
And why the passion? Where's the fascination come from?
I don't know. I think I knew just a little bit, and then I got really into it, and it just like kept on breaking my heart, like over and over again, and just getting worse and worse, and then just being exploited, and the guy just wanted to have a good night's sleep and do some dry cleaning, and and breaks my heart. I cry sometimes.
Does anybody have any questions for Rachel? I've stolen a couple. There's a hand. I'm going to come running to you.
Hey, look, thanks very much. I mean, that's completely compelling. I mean, I thought I knew the story, as most of my generation do. But, I mean, that was wonderful. Thanks very much. 2 points. I mean, firstly, did anyone learn from this? I mean, that little map of where they all went, did other tours continue like that punching schedule? But secondly, have the Belmonts and Dion, still around of course, have they got anything to say?
Well, on the first one, that was about half the tour. They toured for 13 more dates, and it was just as crazy. But the weather was bearable. I don't think the GAC had another tour since then, and again, there's not a lot of articles. Carl Bunch, the drummer, has gone on about it. Waylon Jennings, with the thing about hoping the plane goes down with that, and Dion has said a lot about it, and you'll find that a lot of people who survived from the tour are all saying that they flipped the coin and this and that, and they had a seat that they gave up. It's like it was something, but he was devastated. I mean, he was already a heroin addict, and kind of went down a big whatever you call it hill for a while, but yeah, so that was for years. It was just he could not shake what happened.
Excellent. Thank you. Any final questions for Rachel before we take a break? I'm looking for hands, but I can't. If I've missed any, shout. But I think no, that's it. Fabulous. Well, can we thank Rachel again, please, for a fabulous talk?